Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I am Gini Dietrich.
And today we're going to tell you why you shouldn't listen to us, or any other expert for that matter, right after this. So if you're listening to us right now, you should turn the podcast off. Just shut it right off.
Don't listen to our advice. Don't listen to anyone's advice. Experts are terrible. Best practices suck. Let's just move on.
I mean, in fairness, you've probably already tuned us out. So, you're now just right now you're in that mode where you're hunting for the stop button on your iPhone as you're doing whatever it is that you're doing. So we'll give you a moment to hit that. No, we are going to talk about expert advice, though, and why so much of it is not just bad, but horrendous. Terrible, horrible. It's like that kid's book. It's a no good, terrible, horrible, no good something day. I don't remember exactly. It's been a long time since my kids were little enough to read that stuff.
Yeah. The best part about this is I love it when you get on a rant and you're just fired up because it's very entertaining for me. So let's hear it, Chip.
I cannot tell you how angry I've become in recent weeks, and it's not just because I'm getting old and cranky and all that kind of stuff. Those things are true for sure, but I seem to be seeing more and more of these dumb headlines, dumb articles, dumb videos that just give absolutely horrible advice. And the trigger for me was an article in Ad Age, where it said that the headline is, "The variable has thrown out timesheets and wants your agency to rip them up too." Now, I don't love timesheets, but I think they're important. I think this is something that we agree on. We've talked in the past about how if you don't know how your team is spending their time, you're going to have a hard time operating profitably and all that, and you can't price correctly.
Yes.
So I read that headline, and I'm like, well, great, this is absolute malarkey. But I said, you know what, I'm going to read it, because I want to see what their argument is. It's helpful to know what their argument is. Well, it turns out they're not really arguing to tear up timesheets, except maybe in the most literal sense. Because in the article, it says, the 5-step algorithm they use allows shops to add inputs, including the estimated percentage of time allocated to key staffers on the account. Okay, how do you get that estimated time?
Right.
Timesheets are some form of time tracking. Either that or you just roll some dice and you figure out, okay, I've got a 6-sided die, I'll roll it. Oh, they spend 3 hours a day. I'm pretty sure that's not how they do it, Ginny. I'm pretty sure they have some way of estimating time. So
is the article in some way promoting some new service or software or something?
Not that I could tell. No, I mean, I only skimmed it. I was so triggered, and I got to that sentence there where it said you put in estimated time, and I'm like,
how do you estimate time without timesheets?
Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not even a WAG if you're not doing any kind of tracking. And maybe it's that you're not, doing lawyer style, 6-minute increments or whatever, and that's fine. I don't advocate that either. I don't think you need to do that.
Right.
I would rather see you do timesheets on a quarter-hour basis every day, but even if you do it periodically so that you can update your estimates or things like that, but you got to do something.
Right.
You have to track time somehow.
Yes.
So that was trigger number 1. Trigger number 2 was I was watching a YouTube video because, as you and listeners may know, I watch way too many YouTube videos because I'm doing research to try to figure out what the best styles are and all that kind of stuff, and it's interesting to me. But I was watching this interview with an agency advisor who was talking about he was talking with an agency owner, and the agency owner was bragging about the fact that he was personally managing 75 clients.
What? How?
So here's the thing. You are not managing 75 clients.
There's no way.
You may be the primary point of contact for 75 clients. You cannot manage 75 agency accounts.
You can't even be the primary contact for 75 accounts.
Well, no, I mean, look, if I was going to have just one conversation with each client every month, which I think is the bare minimum, right? I mean, if you're an agency and you're not having an actual voice conversation with a client every month, there's something wrong.
Yes.
And it probably should be more than monthly for most clients.
Yes.
But let's say just once a month. I mean, that means you've got to do like 5 a day.
Yeah.
Can you imagine how exhausted you would be if you had to do 5 clients? And that doesn't even leave you time to do the work, that you were then talking to the client about. So there's no way. It's just not possible.
In this interview, did they explore that at all, or was it just a statement that he made?
No, it was a oh, that's great. That's fantastic. You've really figured it out. No, you haven't. I mean, what I would have loved to have heard is what the churn rate is, because
but they would not admit that, I'm sure.
Of course not. Of course not. And that means you're delivering cookie cutter service. I mean, frankly, even when I ran Custom Scoop, media monitoring service, software, mostly self-serve, we didn't give more than 75 accounts to any individual, and they didn't have to talk to them because they were providing just general support. But we wouldn't have dreamed of assigning each account manager that many accounts. You can't pay any attention to it.
How many would they have had? Tops.
50 to 60 is what we would have had. But again, software, right?
Right.
So, they have to do some management and some outreach and that kind of stuff, but they don't have to have the same hands-on that you would as an agency.
What kind of agency did this person have?
I think it was a PPC agency.
Huh. So some of that can be, but you still have to set it up and get it all ready, and so some of it.
But how much attention are you paying in that case, right? So
fair. That's fair.
mean, so yes, I mean I have no doubt that what he was saying was literally true. He literally had 75 clients, and he didn't have anybody else working on them except himself. But that really means that there's not a whole lot of proactive activity going into those accounts. It's set it and forget it. Maybe you take a quick glance at the charts and make sure that there's no wacky anomalies, but you're not doing anything to tune on an ongoing basis. And, maybe the clients are happy enough with those results, but it's not. I think we would agree that that's not a recipe for long-term success with clients, because you have to continue to invest in figuring out, what's changing, what you need to adapt, and that sort of thing, and how to improve.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, in my experience, and I don't have Google AdWords experience, but I definitely can do social media advertising, and you have to be in there every day because things change, or you might have a campaign that's working really well and all of a sudden it isn't, or suddenly Facebook decides to turn it off, or there's something happening every single day. So there's no way one person could handle 75 accounts and do that kind of work.
Correct. Right. And I mean, Google, you don't really need to be in. I mean, it's been a few years since I've managed Google AdWords directly myself, but I used to do it on a regular basis. And you don't need to be in there every day, but you do need to be checking in on a regular basis because things do change. And if you go 2 months without looking at it, there are going to be developments that you're going to miss. And so you're going to end up having wasted money or missed an opportunity or something. So, you do need to be continuing to spend time on it. And more to the point, if you're in a position like that, then what you're really just doing is you really just have some sort of a cookie cutter service that's being provided, and you're not really providing added value as an agency per se. And maybe that's a business model. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure that that's again something that will succeed over the long term, though.
But I even think, to your point, as an account manager, even dealing with having 50 people that you have to manage and understand, and sure, everybody's going to have their own issues and challenges. Like, that's a lot. That's a lot.
Right. And look, and here's the fundamental point. I mean, whether it's working for this individual and his agency or not, it is really beside the point, right? Because if it is working for them, that's the exception rather than the rule.
Right.
And so my concern and the reason why I went on this rant today was because so many people see the top line, tear up timesheets, manage 75 clients with one individual, 4-hour work week. Yeah. one of my longtime pet peeves. All of these things, someone hears and they say, "Oh, well, that's great." And the problem is, people want to hear certain things, right? People want to hear that there are shortcuts, that there are easy ways to do things, that there is some magic formula that they can employ. And there are a lot of people out there who are selling those kinds of ideas. For sure. Sometimes they're selling it for clickbait, and then they explain, how it really is, right? I mean, like the 4-hour work week. There are a lot of good ideas and suggestions in that book. The title is horrendous, And people just read the title of the book. Oh, 4-hour work week. Cool. I can work 4 hours.
Yep.
You can't.
You can't.
And by the way, Tim Ferriss doesn't either. Okay.
Right.
He spends more than 4 hours a week making media appearances, which is great. Good for him. But it completely defies the logic of a 4-hour work week.
Right. Well, and even still, it goes to the nuance of our society, which is get rich fast, lose weight quickly. I have an event coming up in a month. I need to lose 75 pounds. We have this mentality that stuff works. And so when then you apply it to business as well, you can work 20 hours a week and make $5 million a year, whatever it happens to be. It's just not the case at all. That's not the case. What is it? Right. The saying is it takes 10 years to have overnight success. That's not how it works. You have to actually do the work.
Right. And look, and this is, we're talking about some of the high profile, really outlandish examples. But, if you're looking for advice for your own agency, presumably that's why you're listening to this podcast, right? That's what we do. But you have to process what we say and figure out if it makes sense for you.
Correct.
Because I can guarantee you that everything that we say on this show, you can find another agency advisor out there who will give you 180 degrees opposite
Absolutely.
advice.
Yep.
And that doesn't make us right and them wrong. There are going to be circumstances where we're right and they're wrong. There are going to be circumstances where it works for you, but not for someone else, or vice versa.
Right.
And so, you can't just take advice blindly. I mean, we talk about how we don't like RFPs, yet there are agencies out there that do make good money off of RFPs.
Yep.
In part because, as we always say, there are exceptions to that rule. But there are also just, people who have a different approach to it, and they've figured out a way to make it work for them. It's just not, what our experience tells us is more likely to be effective. Right. For most agencies. But you have to listen to us and you have to process it and you have to say, okay, does this apply to me or not? And as you're looking for people to take advice from, you have to figure out, do these individuals have the same approach, the same risk tolerance, the same general philosophy as I do? Right? You have to find the right match, and you have to figure out if that specific piece of advice matches what you need in that moment for your own business.
And I would say that, I think you're right in that moment, because there will be moments in your business where it changes. So the advice may not work right now, but it does 3 years from now, or, whatever it happens to be. So I think there's that too, where as you evolve and you grow and you make mistakes, you learn that there are things that didn't work 3 years ago or even last year that would work this year or now.
Right. Right. And you have to think about it in terms of, what is the perspective that the person who's giving the advice is coming from?
Sure.
Right? Is their agency the same size, the same service offering, the same verticals? Because the more that changes, the more you have to question if that is the right piece of advice, right? So, we were talking about how that agency that had 75 clients, I think, might have been in PPC or something like that. If that's the case, is that what you do? Or are you media relations or content marketing or something else? Well, then it may not be nearly as applicable to you. There may not even be lessons you can draw from it, really. Right. And so you need to look at those kinds of things and really, cast a critical eye on it. Even when it's our advice, even though we are just absolutely brilliant, compelling individuals that you love to listen to.
I think that's very fair. And there are certainly, you're right, there are other agency advisors out there that you and I generally don't agree with. But their advice works at certain parts of your agency life. And also, to your point, there is no way, like the business, that agency that I have, there's no way we could have 75 clients, period, let alone 75 clients per person.
Right.
There's just no way, because of the work that we do. So I think that's a really valid point. You have to understand where the advice is coming from and if it's applicable to the agency that you're building.
Right. And you really have to start with, what are you trying to build? Mm-hmm. What do you want to accomplish for yourself? Because the other challenge, and I think I posted about this on LinkedIn recently, I see too many agency owners who are doing what they think they're supposed to do.
Right.
Because an expert like us said something, because they heard about it, what another agency owner was doing, because, their uncle who has a law firm said this is how you run a professional service business, whatever. And so they start making decisions based on all of these things they've heard, and they haven't really stopped to figure out what do they want.
Right.
And so if you're listening to this, you need to know what you want. What are you trying to accomplish? And then figure out how you get there.
Yep.
And you can take bits and pieces of advice from a lot of different people.
Yeah.
And if you do that, you're more likely to have success than if you just, buy someone's program that says, follow these 7 steps and you'll become a millionaire.
It's funny because in the SpinSucks community, maybe 2 weeks ago, there was a conversation about employees versus contractors. And, this woman is right now is a solopreneur, and she's trying to decide, do I bring on because her biggest challenge is she has all this heavy strategic work that needs to be done, but doesn't have anybody on the team to be able to hand that off to so that she can continue to grow the business. And she said, do I bring on a contractor for that? Do I bring in an employee? I can't really afford an employee at that level. So it was an interesting conversation, and people that had different experiences. Like one person has built a virtual agency that only uses contractors, and another one lives in California and she's only hired employees. And so having the conversation where you can see the pros and cons of each, I think is really valuable. And as you're listening to experts, you can build those pros and cons lists for yourself to say, okay, well, here's what makes sense for this, this, and this, but it doesn't make sense for this, this, and this. And you start to build that for yourself to figure out what will work for your agency.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the more, you obviously have to be careful that you don't overwhelm yourself with so many different perspectives and data points, right? That you can easily end up with, analysis paralysis at that point. But it is helpful to listen to these things, but you also have to say to yourself, okay, why are they saying what they're saying? So in that particular conversation, I recall there was one individual who's basically like, never ever hire a contractor. Well, it turned out that individual had gone through a nasty audit that hadn't turned out well.
Yeah.
And so, if you're in that situation, if you've been burned by something, you're going to have a much stronger reaction than someone who maybe has had a different experience.
For sure.
And so it doesn't mean that you shouldn't listen to that, because in this particular case, audits are a real meaningful risk these days for any business with contractors, but particularly agencies. And so it's worth looking at. It's worth considering. But you also need to look at other sides, other perspectives from people who maybe, didn't have a bad experience. And so they're not coming at it, from a very negative point of view.
Right. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's just collecting as much information as you can. And I think the over-analysis is a good one, because I did that in the beginning of my business where I was trying to figure out, what does a leader look like? Should I be leading? Should I be managing? What does it look like at the startup phase? What does it look like 5 years in? I joined a Vistage group, and I would sit in these Vistage meetings, and easily the other members were 20 years or older than me, and their businesses were mature. And I remember comparing myself to them, and I really got down in the dumps on myself because I was constantly trying to keep up with them, constantly. And I finally had to say to my Vistage chair, this is not good for me personally. And it was when I left the Vistage group that I started to excel, because I didn't have all of that information coming at me constantly, and me trying to keep up with business owners that had been in business for 20 or 30 years longer than I had.
Right. And when you're trying to compare yourself against a business that's that, old, established, whatever word you want to use, the way that they need to operate is different. Right. I was having this conversation with someone who had a technology-based business recently, and I was talking about how it's very different 5 years in versus in the first few months, because you don't have clients. And agencies can pivot a little bit more easily than technology companies. But I remember when I had Custom Scoop, 5 or 10 years into the business, if I were starting from scratch, I would have built it in a whole different way. But it was hard to make giant changes because you had an established customer base. Right. And so, you can't just completely swing the pendulum if you've got existing clients that you have to serve. And so you need to figure out how do you make those evolutions. And so that's different for a business that's been established versus one that's younger. Risk tolerance is different, right? Because you're in different places in your life. Yep. And so you will find as an agency owner that your risk tolerance will vary from, maybe year to year, but certainly 5 year period to 5 year period. And that's fine. And you should make different decisions based on what your current situation is and what you're thinking about what the future holds.
Absolutely.
So, but you need to put all these things together. And if you just make decisions based on headlines or based on this super simple advice or just do this, and those are the things that I guess irk me the most. The sort of the folks who have absolutes, absolute 100% advice, and they make it seem like it's easy, because it is not. Running a business is not easy.
It is not difficult. Easy. Yes.
and if you start to think that it's easy or that you can make it easy, that's when you start making really bad decisions.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the idea that you can work 20 hours a week and make $1 zillion a year, and you can only work 4 hours a week, or you can build a 4-hour weekend, or whatever, 4-day weekend, or whatever it happens to be. Sure, you might be able to do some of those things, but you also have to work extraordinarily hard at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen a significant increase in the last few months of agency owners coming to me saying, I'd really like to be able to get down to 20 to 25 hours a week of work. And also at the same time, I want to increase my profits.
Sure.
I would love to do that too. Right. And maybe you can. There are certainly agencies that do it. And I have been through periods in some of my own businesses where I was able to really coast and still make a ton of money. And you will have those periods. They're not necessarily sustainable over the long term, because if you're taking yourself out of a lot of that, that means you're missing opportunities. Right. So you may be able to keep all of the trains running on time at a reduced workload. The question is, can you continue to explore and grow and find, where those new pockets of revenue are? I think that's a lot more difficult to do on just a few hours a week. And so you need to be very careful when you listen to that kind of thing, or when you have that kind of motivation, to figure out, what am I giving up for it?
Sure.
Right? Because nothing in life is free. And so if I decide I'm going to invest less time in the business and more time in, hobbies or family or whatever, that's a fine decision, but you have to know what you're potentially giving up. And just because you heard one or two people can do it doesn't mean that you can do it too. Maybe you can, but cast a critical eye.
Right. And I would venture to guess exactly what you said about Tim Ferriss, where you may not be, quote unquote, working in the business, but you're working on the business in some fashion. You're doing media appearances, you're doing speaking engagements, you're writing a book, you're creating a new product, something like that. So you may not be working in the business, or you're only working in the business 20 hours a week, but the rest of the time you're spent on innovation or whatever it happens to be. Very rarely do you find that people are like, yep, I'm only working 20 hours a week and I'm going to go drink wine and eat bonbons. Like, that just doesn't happen.
Right. And honestly, part of the problem is people who come to me and say that, I think the more I dig into it, it's that they're just not happy with what they're doing.
For sure.
And
absolutely.
And so then you really just need to do more of a rethink, right? Yeah. Because I work a lot of hours a week, technically, if you call it work. I love what I do.
Right.
Right. So there are aspects of my job that I hate.
Watching videos is work, technically. But you love doing that. Yeah.
I love doing it. I mean, technically, what we're doing right now is work.
Right.
I love doing this.
Yep.
Right. I mean, if my voice wouldn't give out, I would just sit all day and just pontificate. Right. So this is not work for me.
Right.
I love this.
Yeah.
And so, perhaps it's not that you need to find less hours to work, but you need to find better things to do with your work time. And so, that may be, maybe you write a new job description for yourself as the agency owner, and you try to figure out, how do I get to that job? The one that I would like to have.
Yep.
And, does that mean that you delegate things or you make sacrifices somewhere else or those kinds of things? Maybe it means that you get rid of your agency and you go work for somebody else because your job description is really not even being an agency owner. That's okay too.
That's totally okay.
I mean, it's absolutely fine. Figure out what you want to do.
Right.
And I think anybody who hasn't given thought over the last year to what they really want to do with their professional life, their personal life, I think most people have, right? Yeah. I mean, I think most people have given that at least some thought. Give it some more thought. Figure it out. Yeah. Turn your business into what you want. If you're happy running your business, you're not going to be worried about cutting back 5 hours a week of the time that you spend on it.
It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. And if you're passionate about the work that you're doing, I mean, I was working a crap ton of hours last year, but I was doing work that was extraordinarily fulfilling. So, I mean, and now I don't have that client anymore because they hired internally and we transitioned it. So I'm not working 90 hours a week anymore, and I kind of feel like should I be working? There's that sense of loss as well. So I think if you're really passionate about the work that you're doing, it doesn't matter.
Right. And no expert can tell you what you want, right? Or what you should do.
Right.
And so that, again, that doesn't matter whether it's one of us or if it's someone else that you're listening to or some video you watch or an article you read in Ad Age or Ad Week. You really have to look inside yourself and figure out what that is. Now, I'm not a life coach. I don't pretend to be a life coach. I don't want to spend time trying to, people figure out, what their role in life is. But I will ask my clients very specific questions to figure out what they want from their business.
Right.
Because if you can't figure that out, you don't even know who to start to listen to. You don't have a prism through which you can make a judgment as to whether this is advice that will work for you or not. So start there. Be critical about the advice that you're getting. Don't believe these clickbaity headlines, book titles, all that kind of stuff, and really make rational decisions based on the information you're taking in.
And please let the children go back to school.
And yes, please let the children look, the hamsters come back. For those of you listening in audio land, you will not see the hamster dancing around on Ginny's head. But on that disgusting note, we're going to call this episode to a close. So I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Ginny Dietrich.
And it depends.